The notice had been folded twice before someone pushed it under the door, which meant it had come in the night by hand, without a knock. She found it in the morning when she went to let the cold in before the stove was lit. She stood in the doorway with her coat not yet on, holding it, reading it without fully understanding what it meant yet. The letterhead was from a land registry office in Regina. The date was 3 weeks old. The language was formal in the way that formal language always is when it intends to cost a person something. She set it on the table. She went and lit the stove. By the time the kettle was on, she had read it 3 more times. It was October 1892. She had been at the farm since April, 6 months, long enough to know where the good axe was kept and which floorboard in the hall creaked and what the light looked like in early morning when it came flat across the stubble fields from the east, long enough to know that the east quarter section, the one the notice was about, was the piece of land he had broken himself, alone, in the first 3 years before the girl was born. The girl's name was Nell. She was 11, going on 43, and she had her father's way of going quiet when she was watching something she hadn't decided about yet. The stove ticked. The notice sat on the table. Outside, the frost had come up hard in the night, and the yard was white where it had been brown the evening before, and the sky above the grain elevator at the edge of the property line was the pale gray of something that intended to stay. She had known something was coming, not from being told, from what stayed still, from what wasn't spoken, from the way a man's eyes pass over a certain spot on a ledger without lingering. She had been watching it since July. She had arrived in April on a Wednesday off the train at a station so small it didn't rate a waiting room. Just a platform and a name on a post that someone had painted over once without fully covering the original. The snow hadn't finished yet. It came sideways off the flat land to the north, fine and mean, the kind that found the back of your neck no matter which way you turned. She had one trunk, a good one, and a leather satchel that had belonged to her husband. He had been gone 2 years by then, long enough that she had stopped reaching for him in the morning, not long enough that she had stopped reaching. The advertisement in the Winnipeg paper had said, housekeeper and bookkeeper wanted, homestead near Keswick, SK, room and board. Reliable experience required. Write to Box 14, Keswick Post. She had written. She had not been entirely honest in the letter. What she knew about bookkeeping. Her husband had kept meticulous records for the small dry goods concern where he worked, and she had sat with him on Sunday evenings when the ledgers were open, asking questions, following the columns, understanding more than he had known she was understanding. She could add and subtract without error. She could read a balance sheet and know what it said. What she could not have told you was the difference between a debenture and a promissory note. She had never kept accounts for a working farm, where the numbers moved differently, where what the land produced in one column had to be weighed against what the weather took in another. She had told herself she would explain this when she arrived. She had not explained it when she arrived. He met her at the platform in a wagon that had been repaired more than once with wood that didn't quite match. He was a tall man, not remarkable about it, with the kind of face that had been outdoors long enough that the lines in it were permanent and honest. He looked at her once in the way that a person looks at something they've agreed to before they saw it, checking whether reality matched the terms. He said, "You're the one from Winnipeg." She said she was. He picked up the trunk without asking. She kept the satchel. The drive out to the farm took 40 minutes over roads that were still half frozen. He told her what the work was, the house, the cooking, the keeping of the accounts. A ledger that had not been properly maintained since the previous autumn, when the woman who kept it had gone back east to her family. He said, the land agent came twice a year, and the bank in Keswick held a note on the north half section, and the ledger needed to be current before the agent's December visit. She said she understood. He did not ask her to elaborate on her experience. He asked whether she was warm enough. She said yes. The wagon moved. The flat land opened up around them, gray and wide, and still carrying snow in the low places. And she looked at it and understood that she had just committed herself to something she would have to grow into before anyone noticed she hadn't started with it. The first week she watched. Not conspicuously, she was good at watching without appearing to. She learned the kitchen in an afternoon. She learned Nell in 3 days, which was slower because the girl was more complicated than the kitchen. Nell moved through the house like someone who had been the only one in charge of something important for a long time and was not sure yet whether she should hand it over. She was polite the way a child is polite when she has been raised correctly but has reservations. She set the table without being asked and cleared it the same way, and she looked at the woman sideways when she thought no one was looking, measuring something she hadn't yet named. The ledger took longer. It was kept in a wooden box on the shelf behind the parlor door, and it was not so much disorganized as it was incomplete. Entries that started and didn't finish. Columns that added correctly but didn't connect to anything on the facing page. It took her a week to understand the system that had been intended, and another 3 days to reconstruct it backward through the autumn and winter months, cross-referencing what she found against the receipts he kept in a tobacco tin in the same box. He did not look over her shoulder. He left the box out and went to work and came back at midday and asked if she needed anything. She said no twice, and on the 3rd day, she asked him about a payment in November that didn't have a PE listed. He looked at the entry. He told her it was a survey fee. She wrote survey, Nov 91 in the margin and went back to the column. She did not ask what the survey had been for. She asked later, in a different way, not of him. She found the problem in June. She had been going through older files, boxes in the lean-to off the kitchen, dusty ones, the kind a person keeps because they might matter and does not keep well because they probably won't. She was looking for the original title deed, which she needed to complete a section of the accounts. What she found instead was a letter from the Dominion Lands Office, dated 1889, acknowledging receipt of a query regarding the eastern quarter section of the property. The query had come from a man named Grantham. She knew the name. The farm to the east. The man who came twice a year to the grain elevator and did not return greetings. She set the letter aside. She kept looking. There were 2 more letters, buried under an old seed catalog and a folded piece of oilskin. The second was a response from the land office, noting that the eastern quarter section entry in the Dominion Registry contained a clerical irregularity in the original filing date. The section had been registered under the Homestead Act, but the 3-year residency confirmation had been logged with the wrong year, creating an ambiguity in the continuous occupation record. The 3rd letter was from Grantham's solicitor, dated March of 1891, requesting clarification from the land office on the same irregularity. She held all 3 letters without moving for a long time. The eastern quarter section was the piece he had broken himself in the first 3 years, the piece with the best soil, the lowest draw, the bend in the creek that kept the ground soft into July. She put the letters back where she had found them. She did not say anything at supper that evening. That night, after Nell had gone to bed and he had gone to the barn to check on the horses, she sat at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low and thought about what she knew and what she didn't know and what she would have to learn. She wrote the first letter to the Dominion Lands Office in Regina in July, signing only her initials. It was a careful letter. It asked a specific question about the procedure for correcting a clerical error in a homestead filing. Not about any particular property, just the procedure in general. The answer came back in 3 weeks, formal and brief. Errors of recording date required a statutory declaration from the original claimant, supported by at least 2 witness attestations confirming continuous occupation during the disputed period. She wrote the second letter in August to the land registry clerk at the Keswick courthouse, asking whether there were local witnesses on record for homestead confirmation filings in the district between 1882 and 1886. She signed it with her husband's name. She had not planned to do this. Her hand had simply written it, and she had looked at it for a moment, and then she had folded the letter and sealed it. She did not think of it as deception. She thought of it as borrowing something from someone who would not have minded. The answer came back in 2 weeks. There were 3 names on record as witnesses for homestead confirmations in the district during those years. A land agent now retired to Ontario, a minister who had died in 1888, and a farmer named Dugald Norris who still lived 6 miles north of Keswick. She asked him about Norris at supper one evening in September, the way she asked about things, sideways, as if the information were incidental to something else. He looked up from his plate and said Norris had been on the land since before he had. They had helped each other with harvests the first 2 years. She nodded and passed the bread. She wrote to Norris the following morning. The notice under the door stated that a formal claim to the Eastern Quarter section had been filed with the Dominion Lands Commissioner in Regina, citing the irregularity in the original occupation record, and that a ruling was expected within 60 days. 60 days, 3rd week of October. That put the ruling in late December. She heard his boots on the stairs. She heard him stop at the bottom when he saw the lamp still burning. He came into the kitchen. He looked at the notice on the table. He looked at her. She said, "Sit down." He sat. She poured the kettle and she told him what she knew. All of it from the beginning. The 3 letters from 1889 and 1891. The clerical error in the filing date, Grantham's solicitor. What the land office had told her about the correction procedure. What Dugald Norris had said in his letter 3 weeks ago, that he remembered the occupation, that he had been there in the 3rd year himself, that he would put his name to a declaration. He listened without interrupting. His hands were flat on the table, the way hands go when a person is holding themselves very still. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He looked at the notice. He looked at the window where the frost was on the glass again. He said, "How long have you known?" "Since June." He looked at her. "Why didn't you tell me?" She said she had wanted to know whether it could be fixed before she brought it to him. She did not say, "Because I was afraid of what it would cost you to know and not be able to fix it yourself." She did not say that, but she thought he heard it anyway. Then Nell came downstairs, not entirely quietly, the way she sometimes appeared in the mornings when she had been awake for a while already. She stopped on the last step. She looked between them, and her face did what it always did, very still, taking in more than she showed. She said, "I'll go to the land office today." He said, "I'll go with you." She had told herself the confession could wait until after, until the land matter was settled, until the ground was solid, until there was nothing left to lose by the telling. She told him that night instead. Nell had gone to bed. He was at the table with the Norris letter and the land office correspondence, going through them in the lamplight the way he went through things that mattered, slowly, without hurry, more than once. She came and sat across from him. She folded her hands on the table. She said she was not a bookkeeper, not in the way she had represented in the letter from Winnipeg. She said she had kept her husband's private accounts with him on Sunday evenings, and she had understood more of it than he had known. She said she had learned the rest here, from his ledger, from the books she had borrowed from the Keswick Library without mentioning it, from the letters she had written to offices in Regina under names that were not her own. She said she was sorry she had not told him sooner. He set the letters down. He didn't speak for a while. The lamp made its small sound. Outside, the wind had picked up across the flat land, steady, relentless kind that didn't apologize for itself. He said, "The ledger was current by the end of June." She said yes. He said, "The Norris letter took 3 months to arrange." She said it had taken some time to find the right questions to ask. He nodded once. He looked at the letters on the table. Then he looked at her, and his face had the expression of a man who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has just allowed himself to set it down. He said he had hired hands who knew what they were doing. He said it once, the way he said most things, without decoration, setting the words down like a tool after it had been used. She understood what he meant without needing him to finish it. That knowing was one kind of thing. That staying was another. That she had come in April not knowing how to keep a farm ledger, and she had taught herself column by column through the whole of a planting season. That she had sat in the lean-to in June, reading letters she had not been looking for, and had not walked away from what she found. That she had spent 4 months writing careful questions to strangers, and she had not told him because she hadn't wanted to hand him a problem before she could hand him a solution alongside it. That she had stayed through the mud of May and the light August yield, and the first hard frost, and was sitting across from him now, still there. She had stayed. The silence after was the good kind, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. Then she heard it, from upstairs, the soft, careful sound of feet on a floor that were trying not to creak and weren't entirely succeeding. She looked at the ceiling. He looked at the ceiling. Neither of them said anything about it. The ruling came in the second week of December, 2 days before the land agent's visit. The eastern quarter section was confirmed. The clerical error had been corrected in the registry. Dugald Norris's declaration had been entered into the record. Grantham's claim was dismissed. He read the letter at the kitchen table, and he read it twice. Then he folded it along its original crease and crossed to the shelf above the dry sink and set it there, between the lamp oil and the box of matches, where it could be seen, where it was not tucked away. She washed the breakfast dishes. Nell dried them, standing beside her the way she had begun doing in September, close enough that their elbows were almost touching. She had not asked Nell to do this. Nell had simply started, one day in the middle of a week, as if she had made a private decision and was acting on it without ceremony. "Will Grantham try again?" Nell said. She handed her a plate. "I don't think so." "But you don't know." "No," she said, "I don't know." Nell dried the plate with the careful attention she brought to things that were not to be chipped. She set it on the shelf. Then she picked up the last cup. "Good," Nell said, "because I'd rather you stayed here and dealt with it." She looked at the girl. Nell was studying the cup in her hands with great concentration, as if the rim required inspection. Her ears had gone slightly pink. Outside, the flat fields were white and still and very large, the kind of large that could reduce a person if they let it. The window above the sink was frosted at the lower corners, clear in the middle where the morning light came through strongest, and the frost at the edges was pulling back in thin lines where the warmth from the kitchen had finally found its way to the glass. She turned back to the dishes. She handed Nell the last cup. "All right," she said. And that was that.